In the northern mountains, where mist hides the edges of the world, legend says the gods still listen to the desperate. On a winter night, a woman climbed toward their shrine. Her name was Dahlia, a priestess known for her calm spirit and her impossible marriage to a man feared across nations, the underworld ruler called the Butcher. The climb took her hours. She carried no offering, only grief. For years she had prayed for a child, but her womb remained silent. Her husband, a man whose hands had ended empires, wanted an heir. Dahlia wanted a reason for his heart to soften. At the summit, she knelt before a stone altar slick with ice and blood from earlier sacrifices. Witnesses later said the mountain flashed white when she prayed. The wind turned warm for a single moment. And those who claimed to hear spirits insist they caught the words of a bargain, a promise of life, paid with life. Within a month, Dahlia was with child. Her husband ordered a private physician, bodyguards at every gate, and silence inside his mansion. For the first time, his men saw him smile without cruelty. The Butcher spoke of building a chapel, of ending certain wars, of raising his child far from the noise of crime. Some believed the child might redeem him. 9 months later, a storm opened over the city. Lightning tore the sky as Dahlia's cries filled the hall. When the infant's voice finally rose, it mixed with thunder. By dawn, the mother was gone. The gods had kept their part of the deal. The Butcher named the child Felicity, meaning joy. The name sounded wrong in his mouth. Joy was a thing he no longer understood. He buried Dahlia on the hill behind his estate and sealed her temple with marble. Then he left the city. Some say he went east, others that he hid among monks. He told no one. His brother, Leon, raised the baby. 2 decades passed. The world changed, but people still whispered the Butcher's name. They told stories of his cruelty, of the nightclubs he burned, of the politicians who owed him peace. But Leon's household was quiet. Felicity grew into a graceful young woman who knew nothing of violence. She studied art, sang in church choirs, and believed her parents had been ordinary people. At 20, she met Lucas, a medical student with the calm eyes of someone who had never seen war. They met in a university library, arguing over the last copy of a textbook, and from that argument came affection. They walked together through campus gardens, shared cheap meals, and planned futures that involved no shadows. Felicity laughed often. Leon watched her and thought the gods had spared her for good reason. But peace never lasts long in a world built on blood. Late one evening, after dinner at a small cafe near the harbor, Felicity and Lucas stepped into the street. A van rolled from the corner without headlights. The doors slid open, and men in masks pulled them inside. Neighbors heard a short scream, then nothing but tires on wet pavement. Leon called the police before midnight. He gave them names, addresses, and photographs. The officers promised to investigate, but their eyes betrayed fear. Everyone knew which group had taken them, a new syndicate trading in drugs and women, ruthless and careless. By dawn, Leon realized the law would not move against them, so he made one more call. The number had slept in his phone for 20 years. It rang only once. Far from the city, in a villa surrounded by silence, the man who had once ruled the underworld answered. His voice was older, cracked with years of solitude. When he heard the words, "They have taken your daughter," he did not reply at first. Then he said, "Send me the names." The Butcher had mourned long enough. Now he prepared for war. He called his second-in-command, a man known as Gunman, whose loyalty had outlived most nations. Orders went out across borders. In less than 24 hours, convoys moved, weapons crossed oceans, and old alliances woke from sleep. The underworld began to shake before anyone knew why. In the warehouse where Felicity and Lucas were held, the kidnappers celebrated, unaware of what they had done. Their leader, a scarred man named Marto, laughed as he spoke of ransom. He planned to demand millions, believing the girl's family was rich but ordinary. When one of his men brought him a photo from an old newspaper, a young priestess beside the Butcher, the laughter stopped. By morning, word reached him through informants. The Butcher was alive and moving. Every rival organization had already sent warnings. Marto understood too late. He ordered the hostages released before nightfall. It was the only way to survive. The 2 captives were dropped at the edge of the city. They were frightened but unharmed. Felicity had no idea why her captors suddenly begged forgiveness. Leon found them an hour later. The police took statements, but no arrests followed. The kidnappers had vanished. In the hills outside the city, however, the butcher's men found them first. The entire gang was dragged before their former leader in an abandoned church that had once served as his headquarters. Witnesses said the air itself felt afraid. Marto knelt, shaking, explaining that it was all a mistake. The butcher listened in silence. When Marto finished, gunmen stepped forward and fired a single shot through his skull. The echo rolled across the valley. No one else moved. The butcher finally spoke. Let them learn. Touch my blood, and you are dust. The rest of the gang did not leave the church alive. By dawn, the smell of gunpowder still hung inside the ruined church. The butcher stood among the bodies, his coat untouched by blood. Gunmen waited behind him, silent as always, until his leader finally spoke. Bring my daughter home. It had been 20 years since anyone had heard those words. The order moved faster than law or rumor. Cars rolled out of the mountains. Phones that had been dead for decades began to ring. Within hours, the old empire was awake again. Felicity sat in her uncle's house, wrapped in a blanket, trying to understand why everyone around her looked terrified. Lucas stayed near her, refusing to leave. The police had left hours ago, muttering about jurisdiction and paperwork. Leon poured coffee he didn't drink. He knew what was coming. By mid-morning, black sedans filled the street. Men in dark suits formed a wall around the house. When the door opened, sunlight flashed off silver rings, bearing the same symbol, the crest of the butcher's family. He entered quietly, without guards. His hair was gray now, his face carved by grief and years of exile. Felicity looked at him without recognition. Leon stood and bowed his head, something he hadn't done since his brother's wedding. The butcher stopped a few steps from his daughter. I am told you were brave, he said. His voice carried the same weight it had 20 years ago. She stared at him. You're my father, he nodded once. I am what remains of him. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Felicity began to cry. The man who had terrified governments stood frozen, not knowing what to do with the daughter's tears. When he finally touched her shoulder, his hand trembled. You have your mother's eyes, he whispered. That night, the city changed. Everyone who had once owed the butcher a debt resurfaced to pay it. Old territories shifted back under his control. Rivals sent gifts instead of soldiers. Even the police commissioner sent a note promising cooperation. The butcher had returned, and the underworld remembered its order. Weeks passed. Felicity recovered slowly, learning pieces of truth she had never been told. She discovered that her mother had been a priestess who traded her life for a child, and that her father had ruled a network spanning continents. The knowledge frightened her, but it also explained everything: the silence, the protection, the whispers about her family name. Lucas stayed by her side, his love steady but nervous under the weight of power surrounding her. He came from a world of clinics and libraries. This new world of armed men and secret oaths made him feel small. Yet he didn't leave. The butcher began to rebuild his empire openly. He met with government officials under the guise of business magnate, funding charities in Dahlia's name, reopening churches she once supported. Each act of generosity covered a movement of weapons, money, or loyalty beneath. Gunmen managed the shadows, the butcher stood in the light. Then came the announcement of a celebration, the reunion of blood and brotherhood, a massive gathering at the family's restored estate. Invitations went out to politicians, syndicate heads, and diplomats. It would mark both the butcher's return and his daughter's coming of age. The event would also reveal his plans for her future. Leon was uneasy. He warned his brother quietly, "The girl has a heart. Don't break it as the world broke yours." The butcher said nothing, only looked toward Dahlia's portrait. On the night of the celebration, the estate shone like a small kingdom. Flags of many nations lined the driveway. Guests arrived in convoys, greeted by music, champagne, and the kind of security usually reserved for heads of state. Inside, Felicity wore a gown of white silk embroidered with lilel, her mother's favorite flower. She searched for Lucas among the crowd. He stood near the garden, watching her from a distance, unsure whether he still belonged in her world. When the butcher raised his glass, the hall fell silent. "Tonight," he said, "the house of Dahlia lives again. I have been gone too long, I have lost too much. But the gods gave me a daughter, and she has returned to me whole. For that, I offer gratitude." Applause filled the hall, but then his voice changed a calm and deliberate. "And to secure her future, I join our blood with the most powerful family in the nation. My daughter, Felicity, will be wed to Johnson, the son of our Prime Minister." The announcement hit the room like thunder. Diplomats smiled and clapped, cameras flashed, but Felicity froze. She turned toward her father in disbelief. Across the hall, Lucas's face went pale. She wanted to protest, to speak, but the butcher only looked at her with the same cold certainty that had once ruled armies. The night went on in music and speeches, yet beneath the lights, the daughter of Dahlia felt like a prisoner. As the final guests arrived, Felicity slipped out through the back corridors. She found Lucas waiting by the stables, holding her coat. "We can leave now," he whispered, "before it's too late." Tears glittered on her cheeks. "He'll never stop looking for me. Then we'll run far enough that even gods can't find us." Inside the ballroom, the butcher met with visiting generals and ministers, shaking hands, hiding the tremor that had begun to grow in his chest. It was nearly dawn when Gunman entered, pale and tense. "What is it?" the butcher asked. Gunman hesitated. "Your daughter, she's gone." For a moment, there was no sound but the faint hum of the lights. The butcher set down his glass. Outside, the first birds began to sing. He looked toward the horizon, where the sun was rising, and said nothing. Before sunrise, two horses rode quietly down the eastern path that cut through the forest behind the estate. Felicity clung to Lucas, her gown torn at the hem, her hands trembling from cold and fear. The road ahead curved toward the mountains, the same mountains where her mother once prayed for her life. They rode for hours without speaking. Only the sound of hooves and wind moved through the trees. At the first village they reached, Lucas sold the horses and bought a small car with what money he had. They drove until the city lights disappeared behind them. In the back seat, Felicity whispered, "If he finds us, he'll kill you." Lucas shook his head. He won't kill his daughter's happiness, but even he didn't believe it. They both knew the butcher's mercy had died with Dahlia. At the mansion, Gunman stood before his leader, waiting for orders. The butcher's face was expressionless. "No one touches her," he said. "Not yet. Find them. Watch them. Bring me word when they stop running." Gunman obeyed. Within hours, satellites and informants began tracing every possible lead: a gas station receipt, a highway camera, a phone signal. The butcher returned to Dahlia's shrine and lit candles around her portrait. He spoke softly, not as a warlord, but as a widower. "They took her from me once, and I let it happen," he said. "Not again. She will return, even if she hates me." Meanwhile, Felicity and Lucas reached the coastal border, a stretch of land filled with smugglers, fishermen, and wanderers. They hid in an abandoned lighthouse, surviving on canned food and bottled water. Nights were filled with wind and silence. For the first time, Felicity told Lucas about her mother's deal with the gods. "She gave her life for mine," she said. "Maybe that's why Father thinks he owns me. Maybe he believes I'm something borrowed from heaven." Lucas took her hand. "Then let's live enough to make her sacrifice worth it." Days turned to weeks. Gunman finally located them through a trader who had sold them fuel. He sent a coded message to the butcher. "They are alive." The reply came instantly. "Do nothing." For the first time in his career, Gunman disobeyed a command. He went alone to the lighthouse, unarmed, dressed in plain clothes. When Felicity opened the door and saw the scarred man from her father's side, she stepped back in fear. "I'm not here to harm you," Gunman said. "He doesn't want you dead. He just wants you to come home." Lucas stood between them. "She has a home now, with me." Gunman's eyes softened, something no one had ever seen. "I've served him for 40 years, he said quietly. "I watched him destroy everything he ever loved because he thought love was weakness. Don't make me take you back to that." Felicity looked at the horizon, where the sea met the clouds. "Then tell him I'm free, and tell him if he ever loved my mother, he'll let me stay that way." Gunman nodded once. When he left, he carried no photograph, no recording, only her words. Back at the mansion, the butcher was waiting. "You found them, yes? Did you bring them?" "No," Gunman said. She asked for freedom. The butcher's jaw tightened. "Freedom." She said if you loved her mother, you'd understand. Silence filled the room. The butcher turned toward Dahlia's portrait. Her painted eyes seemed to watch him, calm and forgiving. He closed his own eyes, breathing deeply, as if remembering the night she died. Then he said softly, "Let her go." Gunman blinked. "Are you certain?" The butcher nodded. "The gods gave me one gift and took another. If I chase her, I break what little balance remains." Months later, Felicity and Lucas crossed the border under false names. They built a quiet life in a small town near the sea. She painted again. He opened a modest clinic. At night, they sat on the shore, watching the moon rise over the water. She never spoke of her father, but sometimes, when the wind changed, she felt as if someone was watching, not with malice, but with longing. Back in the city, the butcher began to withdraw from public life. He handed control of his empire to gunmen, refusing all visits and calls. The mansion became a tomb of memories, photos, letters, the echo of Dahlia's laughter in empty corridors. One stormy night, Leon found him sitting before Dahlia's shrine, eyes half closed, a faint smile on his lips. The candles had burned low. On the table beside him lay two envelopes, one addressed to Felicity, the other to Lucas. Inside was a single line, written in his trembling hand. "I have learned that love is the only war worth losing." He died before dawn, quietly, without guards or guns, the man the world once called the butcher, undone not by bullets, but by the memory of a woman and the forgiveness of a child. When news of his death spread, underworld leaders across continents paused their operations for one day. In the mountains, monks rang their bells. Some said they saw a figure in white standing at his grave, Dahlia, waiting for him at last. And far away, in a small seaside town, a young woman lit a candle and whispered, "Rest now, Father." The flame flickered once and went out. It ends with silence. If you enjoy our video, please always like our videos, share for others to benefit from the stories, and join in the conversation. Always comment and share your thoughts with us. We promise to always reply with love. Also turn on the notification button by pressing the tiny bell by your upper right side, and then subscribe to our channels to always be among the first persons to be notified whenever we drop a new video. Also, to help us grow by supporting us, subscribe to our channel please. Thanks for your support. We love you all.